Life is messy, am I right? Well, if there's any guarantees that we have, it's that life is going to be full of change. Life change, life transition, these things are hard to cope with at any point in our lives. Some are more difficult than others. But one thing is for sure, the more guidance we have in how to navigate life transitions, the better we can cope and hit the ground running. So I'm excited to have with us today a special guest, Wendy Cole, who is a transition coach, and she will be sharing with us some salient tips on how to navigate life changes and transitions, and some very concrete advice around transgender transitions, as she went through transgender surgery herself at the age of 67 and has dedicated her career to helping others navigate the transition as well. And she'll be sharing with us some specific tips on how to parent transgender children. She'll educate us on the transgender spectrum within the community and some basic tips for how to navigate the status of transgender and some of the hurdles that that population faces. So, without further ado, let's meet Wendy. Hello, Wendy, and thank you for making time today to be on the Mental Health Toolbox podcast. Really appreciate you checking in to share your words of wisdom.
Thank you, Patrick. I'm so happy to be here.
Thank you so much. So, maybe you could start us off by sharing a little bit about what got you into this work as a transition coach and what maybe would be the definition of a transition coach. Like, what does that entail?
I got into this when I began my own transition,
Mhm.
January of 2015. I had been in a very dark place late fall of 2014, discovered that my diagnosis had changed in 2012.
Mm.
I was no longer considered a psychological condition with no treatment, no cure, and all the history that went with that from the bad old century. And um, I, I was totally into doing what I needed to do my entire life. Scared,
I can imagine.
it's terrifying when you first think about it because it's probably one of the more profound life changes you can go through.
Mhm.
You're changing your entire um, physical world as well as your mental world. And that was the first thing I came to terms with. And I started therapy in January of 2015. Wonderful therapist. Um, I had not been able to talk to anybody about how I feel about myself uh, actually being a woman since I had first tried the transition in 1970.
Mm.
So that was when I was told by a psychiatrist in front of a group of psychiatrists that I was a freak and should move to New York City and turn tricks like the rest of them.
Wow.
So, fast forward to 2015, 45 years later, I'm sitting in my therapist's office. Stephanie was my therapist, and I poured my guts out, Patrick. I hadn't talked to anyone about this for decades, 45 years. It's been repressed. The toll that takes on a person is just unbelievable trying to repress who you are. Um, that first session, I poured everything out. As I was leaving that session, I turned to say goodbye to Stephanie and I'll see you next week. And uh, I'll never forget, she's sitting there looking at me. She's got her file folder with my male facsimile's name on it
Mhm.
on her lap. And she looks up at me and goes, "What's your name?"
Mm.
I looked at her and snapped back, "Wendy."
Wow.
Um, didn't
Shout
have to
out to
think
Stephanie.
about it.
Yeah.
Didn't have to think about it at all. That was the name I had picked when I was in grammar school.
Hmm.
She was one of the most popular girls in class. She looked the nicest. I decided that if I was ever going to be a girl, I'd be Wendy. So Stephanie was the first person in my entire 67-year life
Wow.
to absolutely accept me without judgment, without need to understand or anything. Unconditional acceptance of who I just said I was.
Yeah.
So that's, and our next session, we went a little bit more into things. And that's when I decided the first thing I've got to work on is everything that's between my ears. All those decades of repression,
Mm.
being socialized as male when you don't want it,
Hmm.
um, and from age 10, when I told my parents I was a girl, uh, forward, every time I met with anyone in society, it was a disaster. It was I was threatened by my parents with being committed and fixed, whatever that meant in the late 1950s.
Hmm.
So I started working. I got into mindfulness. I got into my meditations again. Stephanie took me back into my hippie days. And I really started to work on what were my thoughts that were going through my head. We all have thousands of thoughts flowing through our mind every day. Usually they're the same ones from day to day, and usually they're not terribly helpful.
Right.
They're
That's the
usually
truth.
telling us
Yeah.
things that, we can't do. So I started focusing on shifting my thoughts, rewriting my story that my inner voice is constantly telling me. And I did start journaling. Not a fan. um, I think you said in one of your podcasts, it's a lot like work.
Yeah. Yeah. Talking is thirsty work. All of it. All of it's work, deep work. Yeah.
But uh, what I found the importance of journaling
Hmm.
was not writing it down. It was writing it down and then letting about 4 or 5 days pass. And I'd go back and read what I wrote.
Mm.
And I go, God, I don't want to think like that anymore. That
Hmm.
feels horrible. And that was the value of journaling for me. In the first 6 months of therapy, I journaled over about 120 pages.
Wow. It's a small book.
Exactly.
Wow.
And it was raw.
Hmm.
I didn't worry about punctuation, grammar, anything. I just put all the thoughts down, and then days later I'd go back and reread. And um, in my meditations, in my walking exercises, everything that I was doing, anytime one of those thoughts that would pop into my head that says, you can't do this, popped in, I'd immediately block it. Stop. I don't want to think that anymore. Life is all about possibility. And it's our beliefs and the things that we think and the emotions we feel that block our possibilities from us. And at this point, when I was going through every day, every week going to therapy, I um, just gave myself little life tests.
Hmm.
I would stop for coffee at a Dunkin' Donuts
Mm.
and walk in, stand in line to get coffee. First time I tried to do that, I couldn't do it. Couldn't get out of the car. I said to Steph when I got the therapy, I failed. She said, no, you
Hmm.
didn't. You'll do it when you're ready. And I thought about it. By the end of the session, I said, I'm going to do it next week. I'll be ready. And what I did through that entire week, during my meditations, during my visioning, how would it feel to do this? And my vision wasn't detailed initially. It was like, how would I feel if I just walked into Dunkin' Donuts and stood there in line? What would it feel like? And, I thought about all the good things that I would feel, the sense of
Hmm.
accomplishment, the sense of being able to do this. And then I'd start to fill in the details, like how I would be wearing a dress. So what would my legs feel like in the winter air, and the sound of my shoes on the pavement, and
Hmm.
all of that. And by the time I got there to actually do the experience, it was better in real life than it was in my vision.
Wonderful.
I got to a point where I started to believe I could do that. And it only took maybe about 5 or 6 weeks to get there.
Hmm.
Um, I I just what I determined that I was going to do was, the community uses the word passing a lot,
Hmm.
and I decided that's a negative word.
Hmm.
It puts way too much pressure on me or on anybody else starting this process. Passing implies also failing.
Mm. I
So
see.
what I decided to do was, I'm just going to go out and blend in as any other woman. That was
Hmm.
my sole objective. I also came to a realization very early on that there are no guarantees in life. I have no guarantee how life as a woman is going to work out for me, and even if it's doable.
Hmm.
And but that's where I'm going. I
Wow.
just made that intention, and that's what I was going to do. And so, one of the things that I see people in the community struggling with is all the fears and the anxieties of doing this. And that's one of the things that I have worked with clients to help them overcome. Once you can get past your own internal fears and accept who you are, uh, find self awareness, self acceptance, eventually you'll get to self love. And that makes all the difference in the world.
Wow. Sounds like it. And so I'm curious because sounds like you tried multiple touch points in your life to start the conversation, be that with your parents, be that
Mm-hmm.
with other, mental health professionals,
Mm-hmm.
but you were shut down, it sounds like,
Oh,
and dismissed,
absolutely.
or if not, judged, right?
The first psychiatrist I was exposed to was at age 10.
Hmm.
And he basically talked by me,
Hmm.
and he talked to my parents. And he said, well, this is just a little transvestism. He's too young to diagnose as transsexual.
Hmm.
First time I'd ever heard those two words.
Right.
And it was, he said to my parents, all little boys experiment with this,
Hmm.
their curiosities, etc. So, uh, and he said to my parents, once he has a career, once he has a wife and a family and all of that, he'll forget all about being a girl. I spoke up and said, no, I am a girl. That was in the late 50s.
Yeah, I imagine things were
You can imagine how
very
well
difficult
that went.
at that point. Yeah.
I was ultimately threatened with being committed to the institution,
Hmm.
and fixed was the term was used.
Hmm.
Um, the next time I tried to do anything about this, I was 22,
Hmm.
and it was 1970. and I had a psychiatrist who would help me.
Mm-hmm.
Again, there's no internet. I couldn't
Right.
research that
Right.
much. Libraries didn't have much information on this at the time. And um, he had me coming out to my neighbors.
Mm-hmm.
I lived in an apartment off campus. I wasn't part of any of this on campus at all.
Mm-hmm.
This was just totally off campus stuff, just between me and people that I knew locally in town.
Kind of testing the waters with people who are maybe outside of that social bubble.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
My psychiatrist got the idea of taking me to a group meeting, quarterly meeting of a group of psychiatrists.
Mm-hmm.
It was about 15 to 20 in a hospital conference room. I'm talking with them, telling them about my thing. And I wasn't into it for more than 5 minutes. And one of the psychiatrists stands up, says, "Oh, I'll see you all next quarter." Looks at me, and that's when he said, "You're a freak.
Wow.
You should move to New York City and turn tricks like the rest of them." I went to my next session with my psychiatrist. That ended the meeting. I went
So
to my
that
next.
didn't terminate treatment for you. Like you didn't say, that's it, I'm out. Like I'm burnt. This is, you stuck with your psychiatrist?
I I went back for my next session, and that's when he informed me that the diagnosis for my condition was psychological, no treatment, no cure. And it turns out that he also wanted me to tell my parents what I was
Mm-hmm.
doing, even though I was clearly over 18.
Right. Right.
Um,
Young 20s, right? You said 22, 23.
yeah, 22.
Yeah.
And it was, uh, I realized then that that psychiatrist was probably right. My only options in those days were to either live underground outside of mainstream society. New York City would have been a great place for that. After all, Greenwich Village was my playground in high school and
Mm-hmm.
college. So
Mm-hmm.
uh, it would have been fun in one sense.
Sure.
And San Francisco would have been the other choice city. But
Mm-hmm.
in 1970, that was it.
Yeah. Limited choices
Very limited
for
choices.
a semblance of acceptance. Right.
Right. And even even in New York State at that time, and even in New York City, I would be arrested and fined uh, for appearing in public as a girl.
Wow. I didn't even know that was a thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. That they could do that.
That's why in 1969 at Stonewall, the people who threw the first bricks were the
Mm-hmm.
drag queens and the transsexuals.
Ah, makes sense.
They were tired of
Yeah.
being harassed by the New York
Mm-hmm.
City cops.
Wow.
So um, it's that's my past with it. From 1970 on, I repressed.
Mm. So
Um,
so at 22, you started the work of figuring out yourself, getting mental health interventions, trying to figure out how to get a roadmap to this. So, you're trying to figure it out. But then there was so much pushback, not just from the community, but from your counselors that you regressed. Like you hung it back up, right? You decided to
Absolutely.
this is not feasible, or is just too disheartening? What caused you to hang that back up and not to continue to pursue it during that period?
I think the big change for me was finding out there was absolutely no medical support for this whatsoever.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I didn't know that there were surgeons out there who would do the operations.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I didn't know that there was any kind of a community out there at that time. I don't know how much that was, and it was pretty much in hiding.
Mm-hmm.
Everything was underground. There was nothing um, to lead me to believe that I could do this and remain part of everyday life. And I've talked to several other girls over my last few years and found that they went through the same things. It was fairly typical story. Either you did it and went underground, or you didn't.
Mm.
And I had gotten to a point where, I was told a career, a wife, a house, a family, and you'll forget all about this.
Mm-hmm.
So that was the one option that I hadn't tried.
Mm-hmm.
So I did.
Oh, really?
Uh-huh. And I got married. I had my career in tech that I started
Mm-hmm.
in 1974. And I got married in December of 74. I started my career in January of 74. So far, so good.
Check the boxes, the social boxes. It says this is what
Oh,
you're
all those
supposed to
little
do,
boxes. We got
right?
to check them.
This is what leads to social acceptance, right?
Hmm. So I worked for Digital Equipment Corporation in Massachusetts for 20 years.
Mm-hmm.
I wound up getting transferred to Philadelphia
Mm-hmm.
area. Lived outside of Philly for since from '89 until May of 2023. And I got laid off from digital finally after about 20 years or so. They went out of business.
Mm.
Second largest computer manufacturer to IBM folded.
Wow.
So I went about reinventing myself.
Mm-hmm.
Went into contract programming and database development and did contract work until around 2012. And the entire time, Patrick, all I did was my job in tech was a huge distraction.
Mm-hmm.
It kept me occupied 10, 12 hours a day staring at a computer screen.
Yeah, I can imagine you can kind of hide in a cave and do that work. Yeah.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
the other beneficial thing to it is I didn't have to be terribly social.
Right.
I
Right.
found being social very difficult and really tough to um, be open with people.
Mm.
I had this huge secret to hide,
Well,
and
sure. Talk about
and
your skeletons. Yeah. It's a
it's
tough
not
one.
a choice.
Yeah.
It doesn't go away. It's
Right.
with you morning till night.
Mm.
So um, when I wasn't being distracted by my tech work, I was doing things like finish carpentry, cabinet
Mm-hmm.
making.
Mm-hmm.
Loved music, listening to it, into all of that kind of stuff. So it, and I found in the early 90s that I really needed help with this.
Mm-hmm.
That's when I found out that if I went to psychiatrists and I didn't tell them the underlying root cause,
Uh-huh.
I just made up things
Mm-hmm.
like I have a lot of stress from my job, anxiety with family, blah, blah, blah. They would be more than happy to prescribe medications for me.
Mm-hmm.
So I basically made up reasons for why I had anger issues,
Mm-hmm.
depression, anxiety, couldn't sleep, couldn't wake up, all of those types of things. And through the 90s and into the early 2000s, they kept me heavily medicated. Uh, once I got into 2015, and it was end of February 2015, I announced to my wife at the time, I am starting estrogen therapy.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when we decided we were getting a divorce.
Yeah. Wow. That must have been a very, very difficult conversation.
Well,
Yeah.
it was in one sense and not in another.
Mm.
I'll explain.
Please. Yeah.
4 years into being married, I couldn't take it anymore.
Mm.
The stress of hiding this. Um, I was talking in my sleep, and I woke my wife up one night talking in my sleep about being a woman.
Mm-hmm.
And she demanded an explanation. And I decided, okay, I'm just going to put it all out there.
Mm.
And figuring that we would probably be divorced by morning. I don't know what that will lead to, but I don't feel like I have any other option.
Right.
So the following morning, she looks at me and says, uh, as long as you don't do anything about it, as long as you don't pursue anything with this, we'll stay married.
Mm.
I let it
Ultimatum.
ride.
Yeah.
I didn't question it.
Yeah.
Why would I? I had no other options, at
Mm-hmm.
least none that I could see or believe in. So um, we went on from there. She did allow me to cross dress for a period of time. Um, and that didn't help.
Mm-hmm.
I hated it.
Yeah.
I had to take everything off.
Mm-hmm.
It reminded me of what I couldn't be and who I couldn't be.
Right.
So in 2015, when we're having this conversation and she says she wants a divorce, the only thing I asked was why, knowing the answer, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And she said, you're going to develop breasts. Lord knows what else you're going to do. I discussed it with her in 78 that I would love to have the surgery.
Mm-hmm.
So that was the reason. So it was very easy for me to just say, okay, we're getting a divorce.
Yeah.
Fortunately, it was an amicable divorce, not without its stresses, of course,
Mm-hmm.
and all of that. But all the way from January of 2015 to June of 2015, I was doing what I call my internal work
Mm-hmm.
to align myself with who I really am, get past all that male socialization that I had been burdened with,
Right.
um, and really start figuring myself out.
Yeah.
And by the time I got to June, my wife said to me, "Oh, I'm upset. I am anxious about the future. I don't know where this is going. And you really upset me. You're so happy." And I said, I apologize, but I am happy. I'm finally able to go do what I needed to do all along.
I've been holding your breath for so long. You can
Yeah,
exhale. Yeah.
yeah. And um, it was only a few years ago she looked at me with divorced and all, but she looked at me and she said, Wendy, it's really good that you moved out and lived away. You never would have transitioned as well had you stayed here living with me and married.
Taking half measures. Right.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I looked at her and I said, thank you for that. And that's one of the reasons why I so readily agreed to a divorce, because I knew that I would wind up having to discuss everything I was doing.
Mm-hmm.
And when you start doing that, regardless of whether it's a spouse, a partner, whatever, when you start doing that, that's when you start to compromise your transition and compromise what you need to do. I ran a support group for a couple of years. And one of the girls in the support group who's we're on pretty much the same time frame, she made a statement that I won't forget. I thought it was particularly good. When you're going through a profound life change like this, or any kind of a really major life change, the best thing you can do is be selfish. Focus on yourself, because that's what you need to do in order to get through it.
Sounds like wise words.
But so going through all of that, that's where I came up with Wendy's 80% rule.
Yeah, can you tell us about that a little bit?
Sure.
I know that's something you're a big proponent of on your social media and website, and I'm curious what that's about.
I discovered going through all of this that life change, whether it's career, moving, gender transition, it's 80%, begins and is 80% between your ears. The thoughts that you have trigger emotions. Those emotions trigger our chemical production in our bodies, the neuropeptides that get produced, the hormones that get produced. That's how the mind communicates with us with the body as to what you're feeling, what you're thinking. And all those horrible thoughts that I journaled, they were kicking up my anxiety level so much. So block those thoughts.
Yeah.
Shift them. Change them to something that's more supportive, that's believable. You can't live outside your beliefs.
I'm glad you bring that up, because that's, I think, one of the biggest challenges when we talk about catching our thoughts, challenging our thoughts, right? Because change is more than positive psychology. It's more than just telling ourselves something is true, because if we don't believe it, then
exactly,
kind of falls on deaf ears, right?
We can't fake ourselves out.
Subconscious knows better than that.
Exactly.
True.
Oh, that was the thing that I found most useful about mindfulness and being present. Is it really opens you up to what is really going on and possibilities of taking a glimpse into that subconscious and what's going on there. And the more I learned to shift my beliefs and manage my thoughts and what my inner voice was telling me, the better off I was doing with all of this. So by the time I moved into my first apartment, the moving company left. I took off my male facsimile's last remaining clothes, put on a denim skirt, sandals atop, and went grocery shopping.
Wow.
Never looked back. I've literally been in all kinds of situations and never felt any fear or hesitancy or anxiety about it at all.
Wow.
The first major thing I went through was in Pennsylvania, you have to go to court to change your name. And I wound up standing in a packed courtroom with my lawyer in front of a judge at the podium announcing that I was transgender. This is my name. I need to change it to that name. And she had told me, after you say your little speech, don't say another word unless I tell you to. Because he's going to look for every way possible to refuse you. And he did. And she did the talking. And when it was all said and done and I got my legal name change, I turned around, looked at this packed courtroom, and I'd say at least 2/3 of the women were sitting there smiling,
Hmm.
and the men were.
Yeah. So even after you had made a full cognitive shift that I'm going to live my life, 100% in line with my identity, with my value system, even then, like when you were ready to take those steps, again, more friction, more roadblocks, right?
Mm-hmm.
Even something as simple as a name change,
Mm-hmm.
you would think would be simple.
In some places it is, in others it's not so much.
Yeah.
It varies from state to state and actually county by county. Um, I had a client in Arkansas. Took her almost a year to get a name change done
Wow.
with a lawyer and waiting for a court date.
That's so
Uh,
many parts of the process.
mhm.
Sounds like not just the personal deep work and then managing obviously the social aspect, but then the legalities of it too, right?
Mhm. One of the things that I do with my clients is I take them through the steps of making a roadmap of what their transition will look like,
Mm-hmm.
based on what they need to do. And it's a unique roadmap, unique to them. No dates, no timetables. It's not a project.
Mm-hmm.
You can
Mm-hmm.
go as fast as you want or as slow as you want. Um, Common thread within the community is that transition takes a long time and is difficult.
Mm-hmm.
My comeback to that is if that's what you believe, it will be,
Right.
but it doesn't have to be.
Yeah. And I hear this a
I,
lot when it comes to limiting beliefs, and I've had so many different disciplines on this podcast, different walks of life, different niches. And one thing that seems to be the through line is that when it comes to limiting beliefs, progress oftentimes could happen a lot faster for us if we get out of our own way,
Mhm.
right?
Oh,
Yeah.
absolutely. I did. I went from uh, 45 years of repression, mm, hadn't cross-dressed in probably 35 years or more,
Hmm.
and I went from male to female in 6 months.
Once you had determined and worked on your thought process and, like you said, the journaling
Exactly.
and your limiting beliefs, and you could see it more objectively, right?
Hmm. And
Yeah.
those life tests that I gave myself every week on the way to and from therapy were very important. I learned, okay, gender identity. When people see you the first time, walking into a store, walking down the street, whatever, your gender um, is assigned by whoever sees you within seconds, and
Mm.
usually subconsciously. And that's when I decided that it's up to me not to confuse them.
Hmm.
So, oh, what is the difference between transgender and gender identity?
Yeah, I thought because you're bringing up this subject now, that'd be a good time to kind of
Cool.
differentiate that. Maybe you'd have some words of wisdom on it, or you could
Okay.
shed a little light for those who
Well,
aren't familiar with the semantics of everything.
gender identity. I think most heterosexual people in everyday life don't even think of the word gender.
Hmm.
It's just sex.
Right.
Your sex is male, your sex is female. Period. That's it. Um, they're not that cognizant or aware of the word gender and gender identity. Gender
Mhm.
is between the ears, not between the legs.
Gotcha. Yeah, it's a good way to put it. Yeah.
And well, I used to joke around with the um, uh, guys that I knew at the gay bar that I went to for quite a number of years. I enjoyed happy hour there with them. I
Mm-hmm.
could talk to them. I talked with a lot of people there. And um, they would all go, "How can you do that?"
Mm.
I'm correcting my birth defect.
Ah.
Up here, my brain went female, my body went male.
Mm-hmm.
Not my fault, not my problem, but I have to deal with it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how I'm dealing with it. So, gender identity is how you identify as male, female, and I believe the DMV offers another option, and that is non binary.
Non-binary. Mm-hmm.
So, as far as I'm concerned, gender is a continuum, it's a spectrum. No one is perfectly male, no one is perfectly female. We all fall and move in between those two extremes.
Mm-hmm.
That's gender identity. In terms of the word transgender, there's the definition that WPATH puts on it. The World Professional Transgender Health Organization puts on it, which is more of a medical type definition of how you're born and everything. And I do agree with that. It's how you're born.
Mm-hmm.
And again, it can affect people, I believe, in different degrees, which is the other reasons why I don't accept transgender as a gender identity.
Mm.
It's how I was born.
Gotcha.
Um,
Because one precludes the other, right?
Within the transgender community, there are a lot of people who, if you ask them what their identity is, their gender identity, they'll say, "I'm transgender,"
Mm-hmm.
or "I'm a trans woman,"
Mm-hmm.
and that's okay. I, for one, though, refuse to do that. I will not put the word trans in front of woman and apply it to myself. I am a woman. That's
Gotcha.
how I identify. In terms of the transgender community,
Mm-hmm.
again, I look at that as a spectrum.
Yeah. Could you say a little bit more about that?
Sure.
It's like you're reading my mind.
We're on the same wavelength,
Right,
Patrick.
right.
It's a spectrum. I view it as starting on one extreme with the non-binary into gender fluid, into probably the largest segment of the community.
Mm-hmm.
The community is, in fact, a social construct, and that's the cross-dressing community. And then you get into the transsexual part of the community.
Mm-hmm.
And there are people on the transsexual end of the community who who choose not to have the bottom surgery. Their male anatomy is their favorite organ. That's what they like. That's what they enjoy, and they don't want to change that. And again, that's okay. It's a different spectrum of the life. And I, for one, had to have that. I was walking down 30th Street in Manhattan on the way to NYU Medical for I think it was my second follow-up visit. And I'm passing by these big black glass windows, and I just stood and stared at myself in the glass. Could not believe I finally did it.
I bet. And my apologies in my intro. I think I had said that you had your, or I don't know what the proper term is, gender affirmation surgery, right?
That works.
That
Gender
works.
confirmation
So it was
surgery.
2017, right? So that would have put you at 60, not 67.
I in 2017 I was 69.
Hmm.
I'm 75 now.
Oh, well, you look great.
Thank you.
So, pick your brain about that. It's a whole separate
Most
topic.
people take me for in my 50s,
Yeah.
early 60s tops.
Wow.
But um, my primary care physician that I had when I lived in Pennsylvania kept asking me, "What do you attribute all the changes in your body and in
Hmm.
your health?" And I just looked at him and I said, "I'm happy.
Happy, right?
It starts with being happy."
The best medicine, huh?
Uh-huh. Feeling good.
Yeah.
So it's it's definitely been a journey in this sense.
Hmm.
Um, I I'm finding and I found because I'm 9 years in, I'm in my ninth year
Hmm.
now,
Fully transitioned, right?
right? And I'm finding that still deconstructing, still
Mm.
learning the subtleties of being a woman in a social environment.
Hmm.
And there are things to learn. And the first 2 years, I would say, the first 2 or 3 years that I was living as myself authentically, just about every day had new experiences, things that I had never done before as me,
Hmm.
even from down to the simplest little things.
Hmm.
Um, One of the things that I encourage my clients to do is become very self aware.
Hmm.
Um, Part of blending in as a woman into everyday life is your your mannerisms, your behaviors, your speech patterns, everything that you do has to change in some
Hmm.
way, shape, or form. And that all takes time and it takes practice. But if you
Totally.
start out from the basis of self acceptance, self love, um, and establish that in the beginning and establish managing your thoughts and your beliefs, it just flows and it's fun.
Mm. I like that you add that it's fun when you wrap your head around the process, that it doesn't have to be a burden, right?
Right.
And not to drive past the fact that learning social etiquette in and of itself is sometimes a tall order, right?
Mhm.
For somebody who's
Exactly.
not technically like socialized. And that could apply to various contexts, right? Depending on demographics and where you drop somebody. I mean, you could pick up the same person and drop them in a different environment, and they have a lot to learn, right? Based on what
Exactly.
the social etiquette is for that culture. And so, for somebody who's going through a transition and already dealing with so much change, then you add this extra layer of difficulty. Now you have not just the transition and social acceptance with that particular vertical. Now you have this whole other vertical of social etiquette that you have to learn. And if you look at it as a burden, then that could create more anxiety. But if you look at it as an opportunity to experience this and have fun with it, then that takes some of the angst off, huh?
Absolutely. And
Good.
what I've also found over the years is that I've I think during the first couple of years, I would say that I was probably more stealth, um, not open to a lot of people. The town that I lived in had a large gay population, and
Hmm.
I figured, oh, they'll get me.
Right, right.
No,
No.
they were wonderful, they were supportive, but I found out they didn't understand.
Different culture. Yeah.
Even within the LGBT community, um, there are segments of the community that don't understand other segments of the community.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd say the L, the B, and the G are least likely to understand the T's.
Mm.
So I decided I was going to talk to everybody. And I did. And that helped me. And it was also very instructive talking. I'd be sitting there talking with a gay man, and, oh, you got married. Oh, yeah. And you had children and you had a career, and then you couldn't take it anymore and you came out and now you're living your life.
Mm.
Me too.
Yeah. So this is where sharing your personal journey can be educational and encouraging for others kind of going through their own similar challenges and journey, right?
Exactly.
Like you said, especially because even, I mean, on the front end, there was so little of a foundation, of a reference point, of a community that to draw
Mm-hmm.
from. Like you said,
Mm-hmm.
not, maybe not like it is now, where there's the internet and there's online forums and communities, and there's a lot more acceptance for even the LGBTQ community
Mm-hmm.
and civil rights and all of that. Now, you know, still very important to share, right? To share your
Absolutely.
experience, to be an encouragement to those, who are going after you, right? So to speak.
Actually, I've found that, well, I was in Virginia visiting a client, and I'm sitting in this room with a group of people, um, heterosexual people,
Mm-hmm.
uh, and basically all conservative Republican types,
Mm-hmm.
but they were open and willing to listen.
Mm-hmm.
And they were very nice people. And I talked at length with them about my life, about what I've been through, about what this is all about, that it doesn't go away. Their friend had to do the same thing. I helped her through that process. And they were very receptive and very nice. And that was one of the things that made me decide that I wanted to guest on podcasts like this.
Mm-hmm.
Is if I can find people who are open to listening. If you stop and think about it, most people in our society have never met anyone like me openly that they're aware
Yeah.
of.
Right. Right.
And much less heard anyone like me talk or explain this.
Right.
And that's what I felt was very important to do, especially in today's environment when there are people out there that say all kinds of crap about us
Mm-hmm.
and actually want to legislate us out of existence.
Yeah. That's where psychoeducation is so important, especially in this demographic, because talking about social etiquette, I mean, it's important to set the record straight for people who
Mhm.
want to learn, right? Because people oftentimes maybe not won't feel comfortable asking those questions,
Exactly.
right? Because maybe they don't want to offend or they don't want to come off as seen unaware, right? And ignorant. And I think the work you're doing is commendable. That
Oh,
you are educating the masses and through your own journey, and that you're doing it in a way that's very welcoming and approachable. So thank you for that.
thank you for that. I appreciate
Yeah,
that very much, Patrick.
yeah. And so many other directions we could go. I'm wondering, based on your experience, if there are any kind of salient or universal truths that you feel might be helpful for people going through tough life changes, transitions. You talked a lot about the deep work. What do you feel is kind of a good kind of jumping off point for someone who's feeling a little lost?
Well, um, having someone that you can reach out to and talk with quite openly and candidly about your feelings.
Hmm.
Not what you think, but what your feelings are about it.
Hmm.
That's an important place to start. That gets you into being aware of how you're feeling. Then we can start to question what's behind those feelings and
Hmm.
begin to make changes to them.
Huh.
Um, I recently went through a move.
Hmm.
I moved. I moved from Pennsylvania to another state. Um, the process of doing that was difficult, um, and there was a lot going on with family and all this other kind of stuff. So I got into the end of May of last year and beginning of June.
Hmm.
I was in a hotel. I didn't know where I was going to live, and I didn't worry about it.
Hmm.
I did some networking with some people on LinkedIn. I got some suggestions. I followed up. And the next thing I know, I'm looking at an apartment in another state.
Yeah.
But rather than agonize over it, rather than drive myself crazy, which is what I used to do in my earlier days,
Yeah.
I,
Get yourself
I,
worked up into a twist. Yeah.
I said I worked for Digital Equipment Corporation. They perpetually reorganized. Every year and a half or so,
Hmm.
everybody would have to do resumes and apply for new jobs.
Hmm.
It was that kind of a high tech reorganization thing. Drove me crazy. I drove everyone around me crazy. In hindsight, yeah, I didn't need to do that. Because every time we reorganized, I usually got a better job. I
Right.
usually did better from it.
Hmm.
So this past year, when I'm looking at where am I going to live and what am I going to do and what's going to become of me, I chose not to worry about it. I knew it was coming. I knew I had to be prepared, but I was just going to deal with it when I get to it.
Right. Comes to, you know, courage is sounds like about trusting the process. It's not about not being afraid so much, but knowing that you're able to adapt,
Right.
right? Trusting that you're able to adapt,
Hmm.
in light of change, right? Because the unknown is scary for anyone. So, yeah.
Most of the time, the things that we are afraid of, that we envision in our minds, never happen.
Isn't that the truth? It's the thing we don't plan for that catches a blind side, right? Yeah. That's the truth. That's the truth. I would like to open up the chat to anyone who has questions for Wendy. Feel free. Now would be your time if you have any questions about life transitions, her journey, nuggets of wisdom for going through this specific kind of transition. Please feel free. Otherwise, we will get ready to land the plane. Going once, going twice. All right, Wendy. So I know that you have a lot going on with your service as
Hmm.
a transition coach, mentor,
Right.
and people can learn more about the wonderful work you're doing at your website, right?
Meet Wendy Cole.
MeetWendyCole.com. You have a wonderful newsletter, right? Wendy's
Right.
80% Rule newsletter. People
Right.
can jump on and learn from you. They can also work with you directly, right?
Right. They can schedule time with me on my calendar. I'll have any kind of conversation you want to, one on one. And the bottom link takes you to a media page on my website.
Wonderful. Excellent. And you've got your socials down here at the bottom.
Right.
These are all active. You got you have a podcast, YouTube, LinkedIn, Facebook, so easy to find.
Yep.
Excellent. Thank you for that.
Thank you, Patrick.
And yeah, absolutely. And you're always welcome back on to share some words of wisdom. Let us know how things are going
Okay.
if you like.
I'm currently working on a book.
Oh, that's exciting.
Yep. Um, I'm putting together my transition in life story is going to be the undercurrent through it. And within the book, what I'm going to talk about is things that I've learned through this process.
Oh, how wonderful. Good. We'll
So,
definitely tap my shoulder when that's getting ready to launch, and I'll
oh, I
love to
will.
have you back on and talk about it. Please. Yeah, please do. All right. Well, with that, I wish you a fantastic week. Again, thank you so much. And again, for anyone who wants to learn more about Wendy, wendycole.com. You can find out all the wonderful work she's doing there. Everyone, take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Patrick.
Thank you, Wendy.